My name is Max Tibor EISEN. I was born on March the 15th, 1929, in a town called Moldova nad Bodrou, in the eastern part of Czechoslovakia, near the Hungarian border. As a child, the first 10 years of my life were absolutely wonderful. I had a large extended family, my paternal side and my maternal side of the family. We were celebrating Passover, and I believe the date was April the 14th, was the first Seder, the first night of Passover. It was on a Friday night, on the Sabbath as well. And so, coming from an Orthodox family, the house was cleaned from top to bottom. Special foods are being prepared. We don't eat bread for 7 days, and only matzah. And by some miracle, my father and uncle were home from their labor battalions. And I always waited for Passover because on Passover, my mother, she roasted genuine coffee beans for coffee in the morning. And I loved the smell when she was roasting the coffee beans in the stove. And so we sat down for the Passover, for the Seder, which is the order of the dinner. My youngest brother was asking the 4 questions. Why is this night different than any other night? And we tell the story of the Exodus of the ancient Israelites. And we knew that next morning we'll get up at a leisurely time and we'll go to synagogue and we will repeat the same dinner again, the Seder, the second Seder. Our plans were drastically changed. Early morning, Farkas, our protector, he was barking his head off. Gendarmes were kicking at the door. Finally, they kicked the gate down and they kicked the door into our bedroom. And they were yelling and screaming that you have 5 minutes to pack a bundle, hand over any money or jewelry, because where you are going, you're going to have no need of this. And we were forcibly removed from our home, and the gates were locked, and we were collected in the school. 450 Jews wound up in a school, and our exodus started from the school to the railway station. Imagine 450 Jews leaving town forever. But nobody gave a darn, what happened to the Jewish neighbors. We were put on a train, delivered into a brickyard in Kasha. Approximately 30,000 Jews were stuffed into this brickyard. Life here was absolutely unbearable. There's a huge communal latrine. The smell of it, you can smell it from kilometers away. And you sit on a 2x4, and it's for men and women. There's no separate toilets. Terrible structure. And life was so bad, you couldn't wash. So every day in this brickyard, a SS officer came, and he brainwashed us, and he told us a story that you're going to be resettled in the East. Families will be together, and you will be working on farms. Transports are arriving, cattle cars, and we were loaded, I think, the 3rd transport, I can't recall exactly, and we thought we were going to go somewhere to work on a farm. Approximately 100 people were put into a cattle car, and then they gave us a pail of water and the pail for a toilet, and the doors were locked and bolted down. I couldn't see my 2 little brothers because they were stuck between taller people. We were standing up in a vertical position like sardines in a can. You couldn't sit. I didn't see my mother. You couldn't talk. There was a crying and screaming of babies, and their cry became quieter and quieter as the days went on. There was no more water given to us, and the toilet, the slop pail was just slopping all over the floor. It was a terrible thing. and you just fall asleep with a group of people that you are stuck together while the train is, and the wheels are clicking on the rail tracks as they hit the joints of the rail tracks. And then I could hear doors were being opened of these cattle cars, and finally our door opened. Light flooded in, and there was a man in a striped jacket and a striped cap, and he was yelling at us, "Raus schnell, out fast." I could see SS soldiers, and they were a very scary-looking bunch. They all had the insignia on their caps, skull and crossbones. This was a unit of the Totenkopf, the Death Head Division, and many men in striped outfits, and I couldn't figure out what this place is all about. There was a terrible smell in the air of burning flesh, and there was a plume of fire behind me a few hundred feet away. And there was a selection. We were separated. Men and women were separated. There was no goodbye said. They kept saying to us that you will see your family tomorrow. They're going for disinfection. And there was an officer who was selecting people, and my father and uncle were sent to the right, and I came in front of him, and he sent me to the right. I was 15 years old. And all I remember is my mother, my grandparents, my two little brothers, my mother holding the baby, and my aunt being marched off to the left. And never saw them again. You know, by the next day we knew that they were marched from this platform to the gas chamber of crematoria too. And we were now processed, as they said. Everything was a processing prisoners. And we were given tattooed numbers and striped outfits. Two men in the striped outfits, they brought a canister. We were given these dishes that were called schisel. It's a metal dish. And we were given a ladle of hot tea. My father was asking these men, "Are we going to see our families today?" They laughed at him. They said, "Where did you come from?" So my father said, "We came from Hungary, the middle of the night." So they said, "In 1944, you don't know what this place is all about." He said, "You families have gone to the chimney." This was the lingo here. So I remember thinking, how does a person go to a chimney? While my father was talking with him, I don't know what they were talking, but I think my father and uncle, they realized what this place was all about, and I knew it by later that day, what this place was all about. So they asked for farmers people who can do farm work. So we put up our hands, and about 100 of us were selected, and we were marched down the road to Auschwitz I, which was the labor camp. And I became a slave laborer working for the German Reich. On January the 12th, we were taken on a death march. We knew that the Red Army was perhaps 40, 50 kilometers away. We could hear the artillery barrages from a distance. And we were taken on a death march that lasted we were walked day and night, 3 or 4 days, non-stop. Thousands were falling out of the column. They couldn't walk anymore. Many had wooden clogs. I still had my leather boots. The soles were not so good anymore, but can you imagine, it was bitter cold at 45 in January. Snow was up to here. And we were black from frostbite. And those that couldn't walk, they fell out of the column, and they were dispatched with a bullet, and then we were put into open flat cars in a place called Loslau. And we took off. So I left January the 12th from Auschwitz. I arrived 13 days later in Mauthausen in Austria. And we were exposed to the elements all this time. Never was there a crumb of bread given to us. Many more died in these open flat cars. They were frozen in a block of ice. We were standing on top of them. And then the train stopped in front of the Danube. We had to walk across a bridge. The train couldn't pass over because the bridge was damaged by Allied bombings. And we were marched up to the Camp Mauthausen. I spent 3 or 4 days there, and then we were taken to another camp called Melk, which was also in Austria. I was in Melk about 2 months. We worked in underground shafts, terrible place. I was in a barrack where there were Russian prisoners of war, actually, but they were in the same boat that we were. You see, they were not treated as prisoners of war. But they managed to give me a helping hand. And then I would say at the end of March of 45, Vienna was being bombed. The Russian army was in front of Vienna. And we were being evacuated again. They took us down to the Danube. We were stuffed into river barges on the Danube, and they pulled us up to Linz. And from Linz, we walked 3 days up to into the mountains to a camp called EISEN. About 3 weeks before liberation, they shut off the camp. They didn't give us any more rations. Imagine no water. The water system was shut off. Typhus broke out. People were dying by the thousands. We were infested with lice. And I had typhus. And you have very high fever. And I was in a lower bunk. I just slept. You wake up in a sweat, and you're no longer able to move. You know, your body clock is running out. I knew that my body was. I was that close to death, and somebody came shuffled in his wooden clogs into the barrack, and he's mumbling away that the guards are no longer in the tower. And I keep hearing this, and I say, shall I get up or not? You know, you don't care, but then something kicks in. And I said, I have to get out of my bunk and check this out. It was very difficult for me to crawl over cadavers all over on the floor of the barrack. And I was out in front of the barrack, and I could see that the tower was empty, and I could see a white flag flying on the main gate. And seconds later, I could hear all kinds of noises of equipment from the outside of the camp, and the gate came flying in, and a big tank is coming through. It had a white star on it. That was the sweetest moment of my life, and I knew it was an American tank, and there were black soldiers sitting on the turret, and I will never forget that. They were in total shock. I remember their eyes were like saucers. They were looking at this mess. This was the first camp that they liberated. Ebensee, they liberated Gunskirchen, and I believe Mauthausen as well. But this was their first sight of a death camp. They didn't know what was behind this fence. I wound up in a hospital for a month or so, and I still wasn't well, but the camp was being liquidated, and we were brought back to Czechoslovakia on a big army truck, about 40 of us, and I was determined to go home. I had all kinds of misgivings. Leaving the camp itself, I was very worried. And imagine, you would think that you would be jumping and running away, but I didn't know what I'm going to meet on the outside. I was away only 1 year and 2 months, but to me it seemed that I was away a million years, because 1 second in this Auschwitz as a slave laborer seems like 1,000 years. An hour is like an eternity. From my town of 450 Jews, less than 20 of us returned. There was only one mother with 2 of her daughters that came back. So you come back, the thing is, how do you pick up the pieces? How do you start a new life? It took me a long time. May of 1949, and went to the Canadian Embassy, and finally I was able to get a visa to come to Canada and arrived in Canada that same year, 1949, October the 27th in Quebec City. And I was put on a train and sent to Toronto. And I've lived here ever since. I'm trying to educate new generations how not to take things for granted, how important this freedom that we enjoy, how important it is to stand up for it every minute of every day. And it's like our anthem says, Canada, glorious and free, we stand on guard for thee. It means so much to me to live in this free country.